Hello everyone, and welcome to this Ask a Geographer session with me, Professor John Anderson from the School of Geography and Planning in Cardiff University. And in this session we're going to look at the process of studentification and the process of gentrification, a case study of Cathays in Cardiff. So as you'll probably know, studentification is the process where large numbers of students, often attending universities, choose to live in a particular area of the city, and as a consequence of that clustering effect, change the social, the economic, the environmental aspects of that area, which has both positive and negative effects for the built form of that area, but also the other communities that might be living in that place. So studentification can be understood as the growing concentrations of students that materialise within localities of higher education institutions, inducing contradictory social, cultural, economic and physical changes within that locality. And this happens in every university city in the country. And one example of that is Cardiff, the university that I work at, and it particularly happens in an area called Cathays. Now Cathays, as you can see on the map there, is this kind of golden triangle between two railway lines, the green line running north to south and then the other railway line kind of going northwest, and within that area there's that rhomboid shape enclosed by some major roads, and that area is called Cathays. And maybe over 90% of Cardiff University students live in that area. And if you consider that Cardiff University has about over 30,000 students, that's quite a lot of students concentrated in one area of the city. Now also on the map you can see a whole range of facilities that have been highlighted as just some examples of the types of cafes, restaurants, bars, pubs, clubs that have been generated to service those students. If you look at the areas to the north, the south, the east or the west of this area of Cathays, you wouldn't have so many of this type of facilities there. These have been generated to service the footfall that's going to happen by having so many students clustered in this area of the city. And that area of students are a great economic boon to this area. If it wasn't for students, those businesses, those industries wouldn't survive. Back in 2013, Henry estimated that about £800 million was generated in the local economy by students being there. And if you think about the income that the universities have as well, as a consequence with the fees thrown in, £1.3 billion. Local communities, local businesses want students in their area because they spend money, because they support, they're a lifeblood for those local communities. As one local business manager puts it, I don't think our business would be anywhere near as successful if students didn't come to that area. So there's some real positive things that students have for an area. But students want particular types of facilities and want to spend their money in particular ways. And their presence also has particular negative consequences for an area. It's really great for students to live next to other students. It creates a sense of community. It creates a sense of camaraderie. It creates a sense that this is their place. And that's a good thing, as this student suggests. Socially, it is positive for students because we all live in the same area. But for other groups of the population, for other aspects of the local community, especially local residents, it must massively hinder their experience of living here, living next to pubs and cafes that are always frequented by students, perhaps with different opening hours. The sorts of issues that we've highlighted in another podcast in relation to studentification. Although businesses might do well, the local people might not do so well. They might not be so welcoming of students. There might be different senses of place between local communities and student communities, and we'll see some of this in the slides going forward. So, some physical material consequences of students being in this golden triangle of Cathays is the litter that they cause, coming out of takeaways maybe at early hours of the morning, and just littering, or maybe not really knowing what days they're supposed to put out their litter for the ash wagons to come by. If you're a local resident, you've lived there for a long time. You know when to put your bins out, whether it's a green bin day or a black bin day or it's a recycling day, etc., etc. But maybe if you're a student only living there for, perhaps only 9 months of a year, and then you're going to move out to a different area of the city, you maybe are not cottoned onto that. Maybe if you live in a house of multiple occupancies, there might be 6, 7 or 8 of you living in a big house in this area. Thinking, well, whose responsibility is it this week? It doesn't matter, someone else will do it. Or we'll just put it out today and leave it out there. As a consequence of that, streets look dirty because the bins are out on the wrong days. The bags are left out, maybe seagulls come, maybe even rats come. It's not particularly nice. So the material effects of studentification in Cathays are identifiable, recognisable, acknowledged there. There's litter, there's noise pollution, there's physical degradation as a consequence of students perhaps not caring as much about the place that they live. They care more perhaps about their own entertainment, about having fun. They're young after all, than perhaps looking after keeping the streets clean. According to Cardiff Council, for example, normally there's about 57 enforcement requests, i.e. for people to clean up the stuff outside their houses in any average area of the city. But in Cathays, where the students live, that's tripled. So you've got this sense that there is a problem, just simply the physical cleanliness of an area as a consequence of studentification. As this survey of over 250 students, 268 students, says that actually a lot of them think there are lots of issues about litter or waste in the city. 251 of them suggest the issue is awful. But although they acknowledge the issue to be awful, they're perhaps not this connection that it's their behaviour that might be causing it. So we have an issue that is explored in far more depth in another podcast about the issues, the positive and negative about studentification. But as we bring this podcast to a close, I just want to emphasise that perhaps this process of studentification may be changing. As the nature of the student intake into universities might change, that particularly in Russell Group universities, people who either are coming from a more middle class background or aspire to live a more middle class life as students may be changing the nature of these localities, the nature of these places. Do students want a traditional student locale, greasy spoons and cheap alcohol? Or do they want more upmarket facilities, the delis, the higher end cafes, spending more money on coffees, etc., and living a more cafe culture lifestyle? And is that actually upgrading areas like Cathays and moving people away from this perhaps run-down, litter-strewn area that might be benefiting the local community in new ways? So recently, for example, in Cathays, a whole range of more higher-end cafes and bistros have opened up, and students were surveyed to ask whether they like these changes and do they frequent these establishments. And perhaps surprisingly, they said, yes, we do. Of 258 students who were surveyed, 144 said, although these facilities were overpriced, maybe a tenner for a breakfast, half that in a normal cafe in the neighbourhood, coffee for £4, or maybe you could get one for £1, £1.50, £2 in a different establishment. Students liked the atmosphere, the ambiance in these places, and would still choose to eat there regularly. Because students live a socially mediated lifestyle, they want to go to a nice cafe with a nice food presented to them. They can take a photo and say, look what I've done today. It's Instagrammable. They live Insta life. And this perhaps is saying, yeah, we want the nicer things in life. We want to live in a nicer neighbourhood. And this is changing the sorts of facilities are there, and may, as we go on, may create a different sense of place from students in a locality, and they may care more about the physical environment and whether it's dirty or not, because they want to live in nice places too. As one student sums up, Cathays is now catering not simply for the traditional student, but for these middle class students too. and they want to buy stuff. They want to live a nice life. And the cafes, as a consequence, make money at the end of the day. So maybe this new process means that more people win. So, in summary, maybe studentification is becoming a more complex process. Maybe students are becoming more middle class in their taste and more middle class in their income through just having money or having access to credit, and they want to live a different type of life as students. So perhaps studentification is a new form of gentrification, of a new class of, in this case, students coming to a local area and upgrading the facilities and services that are made available there. Perhaps gentrification is becoming studentification. And this is an increasingly complex process with more traditional students and more middle class students having new effects on the studentified areas of university cities.